Hello, third grade, and welcome to Unit 6, Week 2. We're going to begin with our vocabulary words. Our first word is the word argue. When you argue, it means you're disagreeing with somebody. So you're talking back and forth with them, and you guys don't agree on the thing that you're talking about. Next, we have the word stranded. Something that is stranded is left helpless. So think about if someone is stranded out in the street and their car broke down, right? They can't get to where they need to go. Their car is not working, so they're feeling helpless. Next, we have the word astonished. Astonished means to be very, very surprised. After that, we have the word complained, and complained means to say things to show that you're annoyed or unhappy about something. So you're expressing that unhappiness and that annoyance with your words. Next, we have the word forbid. Forbid means you're not allowed to do something. So your parents might forbid you from going to a certain place or being out after a certain hour. Next, our word is relief. Relief is a feeling of comfort. So when you've been worried about something for a long time and then everything turns out okay, you feel relief, right? You feel better, you feel comforted that whatever it was that was making you worry is now done. Next, we have the word conditions. So conditions are usually we're referring to the weather or the situation at a particular time. So we can talk about the weather conditions being very nice. Maybe it's a beautiful sunny day outside, or maybe the weather conditions are dangerous if there's a hurricane or a tornado. And last, we have the word forecast. A forecast is something that is predicted beforehand. So the weather forecast usually tells you what they think the weather is going to be like during the week. Now, for our spelling words, we're going to work on words that have a consonant LE syllable. Now, this is not just spelled with LE, and we're going to talk about that more in just a moment. So it's a consonant with the ul sound at the end of it. Now, you can make the ul sound a couple different ways. So I'm going to go down actually into our notes section, and I'm going to go over this with you first before we look at our words. So every syllable we know has a vowel sound in it, and some words have a final syllable that we call the consonant LE syllable because it makes an ul sound at the end. And we can spell that or make that ul sound with a couple different spellings. We can either spell it with a consonant plus LE, like crumble or tangle. So you have that consonant LE at the end of the word in that final syllable. And I'll highlight those for you so that you can see them. Here's crumble and tangle. You can also make that sound with a consonant and an OL, like symbol or patrol. So BOL or ROL at the end of those syllables. We can also make it by using a consonant EL, like tunnel or funnel, or with an IL, like fossil or tonsil, or finally with a consonant AL, like sandal or mammal. So let's take a look at your words. We have the words able, purple, riddle, handle, eagle, puzzle, castle, little, pickle, howl, nickel, camel, travel, tunnel, squirrel, preschool, rebuild, unlucky, motel, and couple. So you're hearing that ul sound over and over and over again, and we're spelling it in all of these different ways, either consonant LE, consonant OL, consonant EL, consonant IL, or consonant AL. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is something that's actually a lot of fun. They're called idioms, and idioms are different kinds of figurative language that are found in a lot of different languages, not just in English. So talk to your parents and check in with any family members or friends that you have that speak a different language and ask them what kind of idioms they have in their native languages. You're going to find some really interesting ones. So what an idiom is that it's a phrase that has a different meaning than the words in it. So the words that make it up, we're not talking about those exact words when we're talking about the meaning. We're talking a bit about it as a phrase, and that usually means something different. So let's take a look at some of the ones that you guys may already know. So if I say, oh, my new kitten is driving me up the wall, she's making a mess of everything. So driving me up the wall means either irritating me or making me really crazy. If I can say he's at 6s and 7s, doesn't know what to do. So at 6s and 7s means to be confused about something. If you say, Miss Zana, did you remember to bring that book to class? And I say, oh, I'm so sorry, it slipped my mind. Slipped my mind means I forgot. It didn't actually slip out of my mind. If I say, why don't you, I'm going to try my hand at this game, or try your hand, or his hand, or her hand. That means try something for the first time. If I tell you something costs an arm and a leg, or something is a ripoff, that means I'm telling you that whatever that item is that it's very expensive or costs too much, more than what it's actually worth. Now, our next one is to say that someone has sea legs. So this actually comes from an old saying that sailors used to use when people used to first come on their ships. And it literally meant at the time to be able to steady yourself. So to have sea legs is to be able to adjust to a new situation quickly, right? You're able to figure it out and be able to find your way quickly. So when they were actually talking about people having sea legs, they were talking about people walking on a ship while they're out at sea without tripping and falling while the boat's moving. So that's where that one comes from. That one has kind of an interesting story. So I wanted to share it with you guys. Now, if I tell you something came out of the blue, we were walking and that motorcycle went past us out of the blue. That means without warning, right? Something that surprises you, comes out, you didn't know that it was coming. Now, if someone says, okay, I understand these are my choices, but I want to sleep on it. That means I want to think about it for a little bit longer. So let me think about it overnight and I'll give you an answer or a decision about it later. So it's usually when you have to decide something and you're not sure which one you want to pick. Now, if you say, Ms. Zane, I have an interesting story to tell you, and I say, okay, go ahead, tell me, I'm all ears. It doesn't mean I'm covered in ears. It just means you have my full attention. I'm ready to listen to you. Now, if we say something or someone takes the cake, that means they are either the best or the worst of whatever it is. They are the most outstanding or the most noticeable. So I can say, of all of the gifts I got this year, the big gift box that had all the tasty treats and it takes the cake. Like that was the best one. Or if I say, we've gotten a lot of work done, let's call it a day. That means let's decide to stop or to quit for now, and we'll pick up and finish off later. We're also going to review suffixes and the spelling changes that happens to the base word when we add certain suffixes or when we add a suffix to certain words. So remember, a suffix is a word part that gets added to the end of a word and it can change the meaning of that word. Now, most of the time, you just add the suffix to the end of that base word without any changes. But sometimes when a suffix is added to a word that has a particular spelling, that base word has a particular spelling or pattern at the end of it, we have to make a slight change to the spelling before we add the suffix. Now, the first one, if your word ends with a consonant plus Y, you're going to change that Y to an I before you add the suffix. So if we have the word happy, happy is H-A-P-P-Y. So that P is a consonant and then the letter Y. And we want to add the L-Y suffix to it. So we want to make it into the word happily. So since it ends with a consonant Y, I'm going to change that Y into an I before I add the L-Y. So it's going to be spelled H-A-P-P-I-L-Y. Or if I have the word fury, fury means really angry or upset. It's spelled F-U-R-Y. So R, again, is a consonant letter, and then it has the letter Y. And we want to add the O-U-S suffix to it. So I would have to change that Y to an I before I add that suffix. So furious is going to be spelled F-U-R-I-O-U-S. So we change that Y into an I first. Now, if your word has a silent E at the end of it, your base word has a silent E and you want to add a suffix, you're going to drop that silent E before adding the suffix to it. So if you have the word ice and you want to add the suffix y to describe that the situation or the place has a lot of ice. Icy. So if you want to describe like an icy place, like Antarctica, for example, it's covered in ice. Ice is spelled I-C-E, it has a silent E at the end of it. So if I want to add that Y onto the end, I need to drop that E, I need to get rid of it, take it out, and put the Y instead. So icy is spelled I-C-Y. If I have the word argue, and I want to add the suffix ment, M-E-N-T, so the state of being in something. So I want to turn it into the word argument. I need to drop that silent E at the end before I add the suffix. So it's going to be spelled A-R-G-U-M-E-N-T without the silent E after the U. So that's it for that section. Now we're going to talk and review comparative and superlative forms of different words and the different kinds of rules that we need to follow. So we add that comparative ER to an adjective when we're comparing two nouns. So he is taller than his brother. This book is bigger than the last one. I can run faster than my sister, right? You're comparing just two things to each other. The superlative or super, right, the top of the top ending that we add, the EST, is when we're comparing three or more nouns. So clean becomes cleanest, bright becomes brightest, strong becomes strongest. Her room is the cleanest in the whole house. The sun is one of the brightest stars in the galaxy. Superman was the strongest superhero of them all. So we're comparing that noun to three or more things. Now we do have a couple important rules that we need to follow. If your word ends with a vowel and then a consonant, we have to double that final consonant before we add the ER or the EST ending. So before we add that comparative or superlative ending, if our word has a vowel and then a consonant at the end, you double that final consonant. So big is spelled B-I-G. If I want to spell bigger or biggest, it becomes B-I-G-G-E-R or B-I-G-G-E-S-T. Same like for the word sad, becomes sadder or saddest, S-A-D-D-E-R, S-A-D-D-E-S-T. So that's for vowels and consonant endings. Now, if you have a consonant Y ending, we talked about this before, change the Y to an I before we add the ending. So the ER or the EST, happier, happiest, H-A-P-P-Y is happy. H-A-P-P-I-E-R is happier, or H-A-P-P-I-E-S-T is happiest. Same for the word dry, becomes drier or driest. Now, if we have a word that ends with a silent E, same thing we talked about earlier. You drop that silent E before you add the ER or the EST. So cute becomes cuter or cutest, wide becomes wider or widest. Now, we have also some that we call irregular comparative adjectives. So they're irregular words. So it's not just adding an ER or an EST. We also have comparative and superlative forms of the words good and bad. So I can say something is good when I'm talking about one. I can say something is better than the other thing when I'm talking about two things, or this is the best when I'm talking about three or more things. So her drawing of a horse is better than mine, or Sarah's drawing is the best in our whole art class. Same for the word bad. For the word bad, we can say bad about one thing, worse about comparing two things, or the worst with a T at the end when we're talking about three or more things. I can say I did worse on this spelling test than the last spelling test. Or I can say the worst weather we had all week was last Saturday. It rained all day. Now, other than those, I know we've got a lot of these, are also the words more or most. So those are also comparative and superlative. We use more or most before most adjectives that are two or more syllables. Longer adjectives that are harder to say with an ER or an EST at the end of them, we're going to use more or most instead. So I don't say something is popularer or it is the popularist. That's kind of too much of a mouthful, right? It's difficult to say. I can say something is more popular or this is the most popular. So I can be talking about a dish in a restaurant. This salad is more popular than the other one, or that spaghetti sauce is the most popular one at the restaurant. Same for the word nervous. So I don't say someone is nervouser or that person is the nervousest person here. I can say someone is more nervous or the most nervous. So we use more or most before words that are 2 syllables or more, instead of using ER or EST, because sometimes those words are difficult to say. They become too long. Now, if you have simple words, simple adjectives that are 2 syllables, you can still use the ER or EST. So pretty is 2 syllables. You can say prettier or prettiest, happier or happiest, hungrier or hungriest, uglier or ugliest. Those are simple or really short 2 syllable words. So you can use the ER or the EST there. When you have longer 2 syllable words or more than 2 syllables, you want to use more or most. Now, if you're going to use more or most, you can't use ER or EST. You're going to use one or the other. You're either going to use the ER, EST, or you're going to use more or most. You don't use both of them together. If you are not sure, check in a dictionary which one you're supposed to use. Sometimes you come across a word where you're like, I don't know, I'm not sure which one I'm supposed to use. For those ones, go back and check a dictionary. Let's go ahead and jump into our reading. And our story this week is a historical fiction story. So historical fiction means it's a made-up story that's based on a real event in history. And this story is called Nora's Ark.
Genre: historical fiction. Nora's Ark by Natalie Kinsey Warnock. Illustrated by Emily Arnold McCauley. Essential question: how can weather affect us? Read about a farm family that survives a storm and terrible flood. When I was born, Grandma said I was so small I looked like a little bird. That's why I was named Wren. Grandma may look small too, but she's made of granite, and she says I'm tough, just like she is. Good thing, or we never would have survived the 1927 flood. Grandma and Grandpa lived on a little farm by a river in Vermont. They didn't have much money, but there was always plenty to eat. Milk from Grandpa's cows, vegetables from Grandma's garden, apples and plums from the orchard, fish from the river, and maple syrup that Grandpa and Grandma made each spring. Grandpa was building Grandma a new house. It sat on a hill, and when finished, it would have electricity, a wringer washing machine, and best of all, an indoor bathroom. I don't need a new house, Horace, Grandma said. We've lived here 40 years, raised 8 children, and been as happy as a family could be. That new house is just gravy. What do you mean? I asked her. Grandma thought how she could explain it to me. You like potatoes, don't you, Wren? Yes, ma'am, I told her. Grandma made the best mashed potatoes in the world, with lots of milk, butter, and pepper in them. You could make a meal out of just her potatoes. You like gravy on them? I reckon. Grandma did make good gravy. But your potatoes taste good without gravy, too, I told her. Exactly, Grandma said. Gravy tastes good, but you don't need it, and I don't need that new house. I like living here. But Grandpa kept right on building. When it began to rain on November 2, 1927, no one along the river had any idea 9 inches of rain would fall in 2 days. Life in Vermont was about to change forever. The rain came down in torrents. It drummed so loudly on the roof we couldn't talk. Grandma spent the morning baking bread. By noon, she'd made 27 loaves. Grandma, why'd you make so much bread? I shouted. Grandma watched the water stream down the windows. We might need it, she said, but I couldn't imagine how we'd eat 27 loaves of bread. When Grandpa came in for lunch, He poured a quart of water out of each boot. "I've never seen the river rise so fast," he said. "I think we'd best get up to the new house." For once, Grandma didn't argue. By the time she'd packed quilts, candles, her photo albums, and a sack of potatoes, the water was up to the porch. Grandpa let all the cows and horses out of the barn. "What will happen to them?" I asked. "They'll get to higher ground and be all right," he said. "Don't worry, Wren." But I could tell he was the one who was worried. I loaded all those loaves of bread into my old baby carriage, covered it with an oilcloth, and pushed it through the mud and rain to the new house. "Guess I built this place just in time," Grandpa said. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you caused this flood just so I'd have to move into the new house," Grandma said. But she seemed glad to be on higher ground too. We'd scarcely set foot inside when we heard pounding on the door. The 3 Guthrie boys stood on the porch, burlap bags in each hand. The bags squirmed and squawked. "Our barn's flooded. Can we keep the chickens here?" They emptied the chickens onto the kitchen floor. "Some of our heifers are stranded in the fields," one of the boys said. "We're gonna see if we can push them to higher ground. I'll go with you," Grandpa said. "May I go too?" I asked. "No," Grandpa and Grandma both said at once. "Be careful," Grandma told him, and he and the boys disappeared through the rain. Even with all those chickens, the house seemed empty with Grandpa gone. Grandma saw me shiver and wrapped a quilt around me. "It's getting colder," she said. "I wish I had my cook stove here." She held me close as we stood watching the rain. "I wished Grandpa would come back," I said. "Me too," said Grandma. We both shrieked when a huge head appeared in the window. It was Major, one of the Fergusons' horses. I was even more astonished when Grandma opened the door and let him in. "You're bringing Major into the house?" "We don't have a stove," Grandma said. "He's big. He'll add heat to the place." Major took up half the kitchen. The other half was taken up by loaves of bread and chickens. We had chickens in the cupboard, chickens on the shelves and in the baby carriage, even chickens roosting on Major's back. Our next visitors were Mrs. LaFleur and her daughter Madeline. Mrs. LaFleur didn't speak much English. "Our house wash away," Mrs. LaFleur said. "We rowboat here." Madeline looked around the kitchen and her eyes opened wide. "Des poulets dans le chariot des bébés?" she said. I guess she'd never seen chickens in a baby carriage before. By nightfall, the house was full to bursting. Besides Mrs. LaFleur and Madeline, Mr. and Mrs. Guthrie, the Fergusons, and the Craig family had moved in, 23 people in all. There were also 3 horses, a cow, 5 pigs, a duck, 4 cats, and 100 chickens. The river rose until the house became an island, and we watched our neighbors' houses wash down the river. Mr. and Mrs. Guthrie had brought a side of salt pork with them, though we had no way to cook it. The Fergusons had saved their radio, a skillet, a bag of dried apples, and a 3-legged cat. They were delighted to find Major alive and well and in our kitchen. The Craigs had lost everything but the clothes on their backs. "We're just glad we all got out alive," Mrs. Craig said, which only reminded Grandma and me that Grandpa had still not returned. We had bread and dried apples for supper, and rainwater Madeline and I scooped out of the LaFleur's rowboat. The water had a few fish scales in it, but no one complained. With no stove or beds, we all huddled together for warmth, sharing Grandma's quilts as best we could. We sang Scottish songs and Row, Row, Row Your Boat in a round, and Mrs. LaFleur taught us A la Claire Fontaine, a tune that brought tears to our eyes, even though we couldn't understand the words. Mrs. Guthrie told how her grandfather had fought at Gettysburg, and Mr. Craig kept us laughing with stories of his boyhood days in a logging camp in Maine. If it hadn't been for the thought of Grandpa out there somewhere, it would have almost seemed like a party. Stop and check. Make predictions. What do you think will happen to Grandpa? I knew Grandma was worried about Grandpa. I was worried too. He should have been home by now. I wanted to ask Peter Ferguson if he would come with me to look for Grandpa, but I knew if Grandma overheard, she'd forbid me to go. So when the sky was getting light, I sneaked out and sprinted for the rowboat. Grandma was just getting into it. "What are you doing here?" she wanted to know. "Same as you, I reckon, going to look for Grandpa." "It's too dangerous," Grandma said. "Go back to the house." But I shook my head. Grandma looked at me hard. "All right," she said. "We'll look for him together." I pushed us off into the water that was full of furniture and trees and dead animals. Grandma had to be careful where she rowed. It was raining so hard I had to keep bailing water out of the boat. Nothing looked the same. Fields had become lakes. Just the roofs of houses stuck up above the water. On one of those roofs, we saw a dog. "Why, I believe that's Sam Burrow's collie," Grandma said, and she rowed toward the house. The collie barked when she saw us coming. I held onto the roof to steady the boat. "Come on, girl," I said, and the dog jumped into the boat beside me. She whined and licked my face. The strangest sight was yet to come. We rounded a bend in the river, and I squinted, sure that my eyes were fooling me. Then I heard Grandma's voice behind me. "Wren, are these old eyes failing me, or is that a cow in a tree?" Grandma asked. It was indeed. A red and white Ayrshire was wedged into the crook formed by two branches, and she was bawling piteously. Higher up in the branches was a man. He was hollering almost as loudly as the cow. "I believe we found your Grandpa," Grandma said, relief flooding her face. "I was on my way home when I got swept away by the water," Grandpa said. "I thought I was a goner too, but when this cow floated by, I grabbed her tail and stayed afloat until she got hung up in this tree. We pushed and pulled on that cow, but she was stuck fast, and we finally had to leave her." Grandpa promised he'd come back and try to cut her free, but he was crying as we rowed away. Stop and check. Confirm predictions. What happened to Grandpa? Was your prediction correct? "Goodness," Grandma said. "All that fuss over a cow." But Grandpa wasn't crying over just one cow. "All our cows drowned, Nora," he said. "The house, the barn, the horses, they're all gone." Grandma wiped the tears from his cheeks. "You're safe, and that's all that matters," she said. "We'll have to start over," Grandpa said. And Grandma smiled. "We can do that," she said. Grandpa smiled back at her, and I knew then that no matter what, everything would be all right. The Craigs, Fergusons, Guthries, and LaFleurs were glad to see us. Madeline even hugged me. "She was afraid you drowned," Peter said. He blushed. "I was too," he added. When Grandpa saw all the animals in the kitchen, he burst out laughing. "Nora, I thought I was building you a house, but I see it was really an ark." It took 3 days for the water to go down enough so our neighbors could go see what was left of their farms. Grandpa put his arm around Grandma. "I'll finish this house the way you want it, Nora," he said, but he shook his head when the Fergusons led Major out. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to get those hoof prints out of this floor," he said. I've now lived in my grandparents' house for more than 40 years, and those hoof prints are still in the floor. I never sanded them out because they remind me of what's important: family and friends and neighbors helping neighbors. Like Grandma said, everything else is just gravy. Stop and check. Summarize. What happened after Wren and Grandma rescued Grandpa? Tell the events in order. Genre. Fable. Compare texts. Read about a contest between the wind and the sun to see who is stronger. The Wind and the Sun. From the Fable by Aesop. The wind and the sun both lived in the sky. Like most neighbors, they got along much of the time. However, sometimes they argued about who was strongest. "I am stronger than you," boasted the wind one day. "I can topple trees and flatten homes. On a sunny day, I can spoil the weather conditions by blowing in clouds and rain." The sun smiled. "No, I am stronger. I provide daylight and the heat that keeps people warm." "Let's have a contest to determine who is stronger," blustered the wind. "See that farmer down there in his field? We'll each try to make him take off his coat. Whoever succeeds is the winner." "Okay, you go first," the sun agreed. The wind took a big breath and blew and blew. He tried to blast away the farmer's coat with all his strength, but the farmer only pulled his coat tighter. "Brr! That's peculiar," said the farmer. "The weather forecast on the radio didn't predict a freezing wind for today." Soon the wind grew tired and stopped howling. "Your turn, Sun," he panted. Sun nodded and smiled. He sent out his warmest rays. The farmer began to sweat as he labored in the field. "Ah, it certainly has become a warm, sunny day," he sighed with relief as he removed his coat. And with that, the sun won the contest. Gentle persuasion works better than force. Make connections. Why is the sun stronger than the wind? Compare this story to other stories about the weather.
Okay, that takes us to the end of our literature anthology. Let's jump into our reading and writing workshop, where we're going to read another historical fiction story titled The Big Blizzard.
Genre: historical fiction. The Big Blizzard. Essential question: how can weather affect us? Read how a blizzard affects the Hernandez family in New York City. Rosa and Eddie Hernandez huddled close to the radio and listened carefully to the scratchy voice of the news announcer. The blizzard of 1947 is the biggest snowstorm in New York City history. Tremendous amounts of snow and terrible weather conditions caused the city's subway system to shut down yesterday from Wall Street to Spanish Harlem. Parents are even forbidding their children to go outside because it is so dangerous. The weather forecast for today predicts that the snow will stop. In the meantime, Mayor O'Dwyer's message to all New Yorkers is this: help each other in the face of this disaster. "Oh, Mama," whispered Rosa, "will Papa ever get home from work?" Mama gave Rosa a big hug. "He must be stuck at work and unable to get home," she said. "He is stranded, but don't worry. The snow is slowing down now, and I'm sure he will make it home soon." Mama went into the kitchen to make lunch. She came out carrying her coat and scarf. "We are out of milk and bread, so I need to try to get to Maria's market," said Mama. Rosa and Eddie jumped up and begged to go with her. Mama had kept them inside for 2 days because it was snowing too hard to go out. "No," said Mama. "It's too cold." Rosa and Eddie knew they shouldn't argue with Mama, but they were tired of being indoors. "Oh, please, take us outside. We can all go to the store together," said Eddie. "Okay," said Mama with a sigh. "But we have to stick together and stay close to each other." Mama helped Rosa and Eddie bundle up in their uncomfortable but warm wool clothes. When they got outside, they were astonished and amazed to find a wall of snow several feet high. Luckily, their neighbor, Mr. Cologne, arrived with 2 metal shovels. "Who wants to help dig out?" he asked. Mama, Rosa, and Eddie took turns shoveling snow. It was hard work, but no one fussed or complained. When they were done, they looked across the street. Maria's market was still snowed in. Mrs. Sanchez, the owner, was trying to clear the snow with a small broom. "Mr. Cologne, may we borrow your shovels, por favor?" asked Rosa. "I think we need to give Mrs. Sanchez a hand." Shoveling the walk in front of the store was easy. It was a piece of cake for Rosa and Eddie. They laughed and threw snowballs, too. Mrs. Sanchez was grateful for their help. "Gracias," she said, and gave Mama milk and bread from her store as thanks. As Rosa and Eddie crossed the snowy street with Mama to go home, they heard a deep, familiar voice. "Is that my Rosa and Eddie?" "Papa!" they shouted and ran over to him. Rosa told him breathlessly about how they helped Mr. Cologne and Mrs. Sanchez. "It is such a relief and a comfort to finally be home," said Papa. "I am so proud of you for helping our neighbors." Make connections. How does the weather affect the Hernandez family? Tell about a time when you or your family helped out in bad weather.
Okay, that takes us to the end of our readings for this week. We're going to talk about our comprehension strategy and skill. First, we're going to talk about making predictions. That's when we're guessing what we think is going to happen next based on what we've already read in the story. So we're going to use the clues and the events that have already happened to guess what's going to come next. And after that, we're going to discuss our comprehension skill, which is the theme. The theme is the author's message. So what the author wants you to know and think about. We usually figure this out by looking at the words and the actions of the characters. How is the author showing how they're talking about or acting towards a certain thing?
Make predictions. Use details in the story to tell or predict what happens next. Was your prediction right? Read on to check it. Change it if it is not right. Find text evidence. You may have made a prediction about Papa as you read The Big Blizzard. What details on page 421 helped you tell what might happen? Parents are even forbidding their children to go outside because it is so dangerous. The weather forecast for today predicts that the snow will stop. In the meantime, Mayor O'Dwyer's message to all New Yorkers is this: help each other in the face of this disaster. "Oh, Mama," whispered Rosa, "will Papa ever get home from work?" Mama gave Rosa a big hug. "He must be stuck at work and unable to get home," she said. "He is stranded, but don't worry. The snow is slowing down now, and I'm sure he will make it home soon." Mama went into the kitchen to make lunch. She came out carrying her coat and scarf. "I predicted that Papa would come home soon. I read that the radio announcer said the snow would stop. Mama told Rosa that she was sure he would make it home soon. I will read on to check my prediction." Historical fiction. The Big Blizzard is historical fiction. Historical fiction is a made-up story that takes place in the past. Has illustrations that show the setting and how people lived, and often helps create a mood. Find text evidence. I can tell that The Big Blizzard is historical fiction. The characters and events are made up. The story is based on real events that happened in 1947 in New York City. The story and characters are made up, but the events could happen in real life. Events in historical fiction happened a long time ago. Illustrations show details of the setting and how people lived. Idioms. An idiom is a group of words that mean something different from the meaning of each word in it. The phrase, "under the weather," is an idiom. It doesn't mean someone is outside in bad weather. It means that someone feels sick. Find text evidence. On page 422, the phrase, "stick together," is an idiom. I can use clues in the story to help me figure out that it means to stay close together in a group. "Oh, please, take us outside. We can all go to the store together," said Eddie. "Okay," said Mama, "but we have to stick together and stay close to each other."
Okay, that takes us to the end of our notes for this week. If you guys have any questions, definitely let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.